Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host TJ Mabardi. We are coming to you live today on a Thursday afternoon. Today is October 10th and we have a whole lot to dive into. Starting off with the breaking news that the New York Jets are stripping offensive coordinator Nathaniel Hackett of play calling duties. The Jets, of course, earlier this week fired head coach Robert Saleh, and they are making some additional changes there. We'll talk about whether or not it will have a real impact on the upcoming season for the Jets and whether or not it's going to help resolve any of their issues. We will then be diving into yesterday's MLB playoff action. We had some Game 4s take place in the National League as the New York Mets eliminated the Philadelphia Phillies, so we'll be talking about that, and the Los Angeles Dodgers, where it seemed like backs against the wall, they were able to rally and demolish the Padres in Game 4 to force a winner-take-all Game 5. So we'll be talking about those as well as the American League games in which the New York Yankees and Detroit Tigers both won their respective games and are going into Game 4 with a 2-1 series lead. So we're going to be diving into those, and then we are going to circle back around to the NFL, where we will be previewing tonight's Thursday Night Football matchup between the San Francisco 49ers and the Seattle Seahawks, and then we are going to finally give our top 10 teams headed into Week 7 in the NFL. So a whole lot to dive into today, but before we get into all of that, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Be sure to use the comment section to give us your thoughts on the latest happenings in sports. Let us know if you have a quick comment or a thoughtful question. We want to hear what you have to say, so definitely be sure to let us know in the comments, and we will try and make the show as interactive as possible. And if you would like to become a bigger part of the show, you can go to the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker, gsmcpodcast.net. Or you can use the Super Chat feature that is available on YouTube by clicking the $ in the bottom corner of that chat section. And if you leave a tip or donation, you can have your comment pop up on screen for everyone to see. Anything would be very greatly appreciated there. Help support this channel. So thank you for all those who do. Earlier today, the New York Jets decided to make another coaching change. This is coming off of the heels, of course, of Robert Saleh, head coach fired earlier this week. It is Jeff Ulbrich who is going to take over for them, and he has made his first real big move of sorts where he has taken the play calling responsibilities away from offensive coordinator Nathaniel Hackett, which he's still going to be the offensive coordinator, so not by name, but it is, technically speaking, a demotion. And I think that this was kind of a natural next step for the Jets. Now, does it change all that much? That's something we're going to be diving into here. As of now, it is Todd Downing that is taking over the play calling responsibilities. I'm pretty sure that he does have play calling experience in the past. He did serve as the Tennessee Titans offensive coordinator for a couple seasons in 2021 and 2022. So I can't say I'm ultimately familiar with the scheme that Todd Downing draws up here, but this does feel like it is a little bit of a necessary change on a couple levels because, for one, the offense just has not been producing for them up to this point. And I think that in large part it is because, yeah, sure, Aaron Rodgers has not lived up to expectations, and he definitely does deserve criticism for that. But there's also the sort of glaring hole as well that I think that Nathaniel Hackett, given that, a lot of his career, for whatever it's worth, and it's not an indictment on him necessarily that he has been so attached to Aaron Rodgers throughout his career, but the majority of his success has come as a result of working directly with Aaron Rodgers and winning over the trust of a future Hall of Famer. Does say something about Hackett, but there does seem to be a lack of innovation with that group. This is something that when The Athletic, I believe it was, did their article last year about the dysfunction behind the scenes, it seemed like Hackett wasn't necessarily on board with changing things up, and that there was some real stubbornness to it. And I think it was time for a little bit of a change there, based off of how they've been playing on the field, and the lack of execution from the players themselves haven't done any favors. But to add to that as well, there is sort of the underlying fact that Hackett is sort of an Aaron Rodgers mouthpiece to some degree, where, again, they're just sort of connected, that Hackett is sort of just the vessel for Aaron Rodgers to be able to play the brand of offense that he wants to, which tailoring your game to your future Hall of Fame quarterback is definitely a decision that, in essence, is a little bit of a no-brainer. You can't run a scheme that directly goes against what your quarterback's preferences are, but there needs to be a little bit more flexibility. And the reality of the situation is it didn't seem like Hackett was all too on board with making changes with the offense. And the other part of this, too, is just kind of politics, given the fact that Aaron Rodgers didn't seem to have a great relationship with Robert Saleh, or at least that's how it was perceived by the media. And, you know, there's a lot of people, especially the comments that Saleh made a couple weeks ago following that Broncos game about the idea of changing up the cadence and such, that Rodgers didn't seem to take too much of a liking to that. He thought that was a little bit of an overreaction. And again, there's just been a lot of speculation about that what that relationship really was between Saleh and Rodgers. So he gets fired, and then I think that it just kind of made sense in terms of the power dynamic of this team, that the Jets kind of had to show this isn't just Aaron Rodgers running the show. He is very clearly the most important person really in that entire Jets organization at this point. The season kind of lives and breathes and dies by Aaron Rodgers at the end of the day. And, you know, he hasn't been living up to expectations. Again, we got to hold him accountable. But that being said as well, I do think that there is some sort of a responsibility from the Jets at this point, where there is so much instability from the coaching staff and from the general manager and the front office as a whole, that they do still sort of hold the cards here. And, you know, how much of that actually is true, we don't really know. But either way, the Jets make this change at play calling on the offensive side of the ball specifically. What does it ultimately mean? I think that maybe we see someone in Todd Downing that is able to sort of provide different looks, maybe from behind the scenes, has some more thoughts as to how this team can run an offense that's better equipped for their personnel. That being said, though, I don't think that it solves their issues necessarily of their players just being outplayed on a number of these instances where the offensive line has not been good enough over these past couple of weeks. A group as a whole that I do think is talented and is capable of keeping Aaron Rodgers more upright and being more effective in the run game, but they haven't lived up to expectations. You have a running back core with two different, very talented players in Braylon Allen and Breece Hall, and neither one of them have had much success, tied into the offensive line part of it, of course, but neither one of them have necessarily starred in recent weeks. And then you have a receiving core that I also think does have some talent and could eventually sort of gel together as Rodgers gets more comfortable with a Garrett Wilson or with a Mike Williams, as Mike Williams continues to return from injury and get a little bit more comfortable there, that there is a lot of room for growth with this offense right now. And I think that they do need to probably go out and spend for Devontae Adams. Adams doesn't directly enhance their run game. That is something that's sort of on the coaches at this point. And we'll see if Todd Downing is able to find a way to make it happen. One thing I noticed, at least early on in the season with Rodgers, is it felt like they were having a lot more success in that passing game when they were making the quick decisions, where Rodgers wasn't, dropping back 5 steps and looking around, where he was just sort of firing the ball out immediately. Something maybe at least to consider, especially if the offensive line has been struggling as of late. Just the idea of, well, can this Jets team sort of at least lean into that while they continue to mesh? They have a matchup coming up this week against the Buffalo Bills for the chance to be the number 1 seed in their division in the AFC East. So the Jets are very much still alive in this season, but there's also a lot of red flags going on from the behind-the-scenes aspects of it, of course, but with some of their on-the-field play as well. So I think that ultimately the Jets, nothing about their season up to this point has been all that surprising, to be honest. I predicted them to be sort of right around 500. That's what we've seen from them. We've seen some good defensive performances from them, but it's been underwhelming a bit on the offensive side of the ball for a handful of these games, especially these past 2 weeks during the losses, and they need to get better, which is why, again, do I know if promoting Downing to the play caller is going to actually provide results? Still very much unsure about that. And again, maybe that's because I'm just not informed enough of what the Downing schematics look like. But they had to do something to address the offense. The reality is firing Robert Saleh is not an upgrade inherently for the offensive side of the ball. And Saleh, we talked about this throughout the course of the week, that they aren't necessarily Saleh hasn't shown himself to be a great head coach in the NFL, but he is a good defensive mind, and that defense has been playing very well. His issues with Aaron Rodgers and, maybe some of the deficiencies we've seen, I don't think are reflecting upon the offense. I kind of think that for the most part, that is its own separate issue that hopefully they'll be able to fix, like I just sort of alluded to as well. I think they need to go out and get Davante Adams. Does it solve all of their problems? No. But I do feel like they can take their offense to another level. I really don't think that offensive line is as bad as they've been playing. They were all right, I thought, the first couple weeks, and maybe it has to be getting the ball out quicker for them, and maybe you have to overcompensate a little bit if they aren't going to be, a net positive for you as a team. It's 3 new starters as well, though, so I am one to have a little bit more patience early on in the year, especially when you're talking about guys like Tyron Smith, John Simpson, and Morgan Moses that all have starting experience in the past. And, I think that they can figure out that front line. Like I mentioned, they have a lot of those 2 talented running backs in Breece Hall and Braylon Allen, that their run game should be more effective than it has been up to this point in the season. If you go getting Davante Adams, I just think it opens up the field significantly more. Now, it doesn't, again, directly correlate to the run game, but I do think that it makes Aaron Rodgers a lot more comfortable, which he has not been up to this point in the season. Now at this point, it can go from Aaron Rodgers trying to work on that development of his relationship with Garrett Wilson, and having that be the full focus for him to some degree. I mean, people are saying, I was watching ESPN earlier today, and it's that Garrett Wilson is a shell of himself this season. That's really not the case. He has 33 catches, which is second in the NFL. So, last week he finished with 23 targets, 101 yards, and a touchdown. I mean, that is impressive stuff from Garrett Wilson. But, again, a lot of it does feel a little bit force-fed. I feel like that's where you insert a Davante Adams, where it's just one less thing that you have to worry about. Rodgers, if he is in a bind, he knows Davante Adams, and I feel like that's a relationship that, maybe there's a slight amount of rust, but I think they can get into that action very quickly. And then some of those figuring out things can have a little bit more patience. But when your offense is looking like a mess, especially with this Jets franchise that, has historically for the past decade or so not been good, and that this is a Jets fan base that feels like they are a tortured community there. And right now, all of their eggs are in the basket of, can this offense compete? And there's no really go-to option for them. Devontae Adams provides that, and then I think everything can settle from there. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section, as we are going to now be switching gears a little bit to the MLB. We'll come back around to the NFL for the end of the show, but in the meantime, we do have to talk about the electric MLB playoff baseball action from yesterday, where we saw some crucial Game 4s in the National League Divisional Series, with the New York Mets eliminating their division rival Philadelphia Phillies in Game 4. And then we are also going to talk about the Dodgers evening up the series against the Padres, which is setting the stage for an excellent Game 5 matchup there. So we're going to dive into both of yesterday's games and talk about where these teams move on from here. But before we do so, we do have to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news if it's some losing shit. A stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are now going to be diving into yesterday's MLB playoff action. Bunch of entertaining games, but of course we have to start with the first team punching their ticket to the championship series, and that is the New York Mets defeating the Philadelphia Phillies 4-1 to advance. And this is obviously not going to try and, bury Phillies fans right now. Has to be a brutal feeling. I was, a little bit nervous for the Mets early on in this game, specifically because of the fact that they weren't able to finish off some really promising first couple of innings of hittings, where we got a wild Ranger Suarez start from the Phillies in this game. 4 1/3 innings pitched, 5 hits, 4 walks, but 8 strikeouts and 0 earned runs. And like I mentioned, it was rough for him out of the gates, loaded the bases in both the first and second innings, and yet he was able to keep the Mets at bay, not let any damage be done. The swing and miss with him and that curveball were just a lethal part of the arsenal for him, where it was never comfortable for Suarez. He got his pitch count ran up pretty early in this game, finishes the game with 97 in that 4 1/3 innings, but again, gutsy performance to stick it out. And I thought at that point that was the opportunity that the Mets let slide. It was the Phillies who got on the board first in this game, where it was Bohm grounding out and driving in Bryce Harper. So The Phillies took an early 1-0 lead in the top of that fourth inning. And then, yet again, this is a situation where the bullpen for the Phillies was just nowhere near good enough for them. And this was a running theme throughout the series, especially you want to look at Game 1 where you get a gem from Zach Wheeler and you end up falling there. That sort of set the tone, and things never really got better for that Phillies bullpen, and ultimately it was just one inning that did them in the sixth inning, where obviously bases loaded, Francisco Lindor with the grand slam. But I think that there is some sort of conversation to be had about the Phillies and how they deployed their pitching in this series. We talked about this yesterday on the show. I thought it was definitely an interesting decision for them to go with Ranger Suarez in Game 4 over Zach Wheeler, who would have been pitching on a little bit shorter rest, but in this do-or-die situation. But to not, deploy him at all is a little bit questionable to me, considering the state of this bullpen, because ultimately you want to argue that Zach Wheeler should have started or not. I mean, maybe. Probably would prefer him to save as many bullets as you possibly can, because God forbid they got to a Game 5 or beyond, that he would need to, be a weapon for them. But I do feel like this is a situation where to not use him at all was a little bit malpractice. I mean, again, it's a tough call considering the fact that short rest period, he threw, might have been over 100 pitches in Game 1. That part of it, I understand. I don't think that it was this no-brainer decision, but I feel like this is a situation where they should have tried to use Suarez and Wheeler together in this one. Again, just sort of understanding the stakes of this is do or die. Your bullpen has not stepped up to this point in the series, and ultimately that's sort of where the damage gets done, where it's Hoffman and Estevez who just can't seem to get the outs. Hoffman, he loads the bases, and then Estevez, who came into, out of the bullpen for Game 3, facing Francisco Lindor, where Lindor got a little bit of a look on him then, and then was able to take him yard for what went on to be the game-winning grand slam. So, again, very disappointing for Phillies. I don't want to just bury them, because this is also about the continued resilience of the New York Mets. That's really been the common theme as of these past handful of weeks, that the Mets have just kept fighting. And they could have been really down, like I mentioned, after those first two innings where they weren't able to convert, but they just kept digging, and ultimately they come out on top in this game and this series. So a huge win for them. And obviously they have, at this point, I think it would be extremely difficult to bet against the Mets with the way that they are playing. But I do feel like the bigger story here a little bit more is the Phillies, and I get it's more of a bummer point, and usually we try and be as optimistic as possible, but for this to happen to the Phillies in 2 straight years, and one thing that I have noticed, at least to some degree, out of these divisional round series is I do like that we are, at least maybe you can make the argument that the idea of having that first round bye isn't quite as detrimental as it was being made out to be. Now, I don't know if that actually is fully backed up, because the Phillies, their offense didn't show up for them in this series. You have some of the Yankees stars, specifically Aaron Judge, struggling out of the gates in the postseason there. It took the Dodgers a handful of games, specifically looking at Mookie Betts, who we're about to talk about the Dodgers in a moment here. He's now getting fired up. I would prefer to get to a point where it doesn't have to be such a controversy of is the bye week helpful or is it not. But the Phillies have had it both ways in these past couple years, where last season they were the wild card team that got hot and rode through the divisional series. This year, they come into the divisional series as sort of, the high ground team with their home field advantage, and I mean, as much as I just talked about pitching as well, it's about the fact that their offense really was never there for them in this entire series. I mean, Bryce Harper was good. Castellanos was good for the most part, but, really didn't get a ton of production from some key players. And I do feel like, you have the likes of Alec Boehm or Real Muto who are probably kicking themselves for the way that this all went down. But let me know in the comments section what your thoughts are. I wish we had more time to dig into this series, but we do also have to, discuss the Los Angeles Dodgers being able to respond in a huge way. I wouldn't quite say I was writing them off for dead yesterday, but I was definitely heavily leaning in favor of the San Diego Padres, considering that they were sitting here, with home field advantage, Dodgers on the ropes, having to go to a bullpen game, and that was going to be a massive advantage. And I still do think that on paper it was, but one thing that I didn't really consider enough was the fact that Joe Musgrove injury that he suffered in the wild card series was a lot more consequential than initially thought, because this is a situation where Dylan Cease, I still do believe in the player, and assuming the Padres can advance to the NLCS, that he is going to have a, chance to respond. But pitching him on 3 days rest, which is not something that he is used to doing, that should have been a Joe Musgrove start realistically. And instead you put in Cease, who wasn't even excellent for you in game one. He kind of gets pushed around here. And the Dodgers, just early on in this game, I mean, you can look at the 0 for the Padres, and that's totally fair. Their offense didn't show up. The pitching didn't give them much of a chance, really, to show up anyways, because the Dodgers jumped out to that 5-0 start after 3 innings. And that's hardly an excuse. Again, you have to put some responsibility on the Padres for not showing up from an offensive standpoint in this game. But when you get dug into a hole so quick, call me crazy, I am a believer in momentum a little bit. And the Mets know how to utilize momentum almost in their favor with the way that they respond to poor innings. And I think it says a lot about the mental makeup of that team. Down, never out. And on the other side of that as well, Mets can't get too high. You have Lindor, who's just been leading the charge of we're not going to celebrate too early here. The Padres, not that they don't have the mental makeup, but I think that it is very tough when you come into a game and you have all this excitement surrounding you that you're going to be able to close it out at home. It's going to be an incredible moment for Petco Park, and instead, your pitching just out of the gates is not serviceable for them. And ultimately, again, I do sort of reflect this back to the fact that Musgrove should have been the one on the mound in this game. Now the Padres are probably going to go with Yu Darvish on a little bit of a shorter rest as well. I do think that it's the right decision. Darvish was excellent in, I think it was game 2 that he pitched, where he went 7 dominant innings for them there. And I do think that the Padres still come out on top in this series, but definitely feels like a squandered opportunity. And now they go into this game 5 on the road again in LA. We know how, charged that atmosphere was when they last played in game 2 last week. Or on Sunday, more specifically. But going to be really interesting to see how this plays out. Again, I'm favoring the Padres here because I got to stand by my, pick headed into the playoffs. But, this is going to be a very charged atmosphere for Padres-Dodgers and should be a lot of fun to watch. So that game does start at 8:08 p.m. Eastern. Should be a lot of fun to see how that plays out. But want to look at the other side of this as well, the bracket as a whole, diving into the American League, where yesterday we got the Yankees and the Tigers pulling ahead with Game 3 wins to take a 2-1 series lead. So we're going to talk about both of those games in particular and where those series stand as of now. So we are going to be diving into that, but before we do so, we do have to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we just recap the National League action from yesterday. Now we're going to be diving into the American League, and we are going to be starting with the New York Yankees and their win over the Kansas City Royals in the late game there. This was a game in which we saw, really, it was the Giancarlo Stanton show for them as he continues to be a postseason performer despite maybe the struggles of others on the team, and we'll be diving into that. But again, was a little bit negative there on the Phillies front in the last side. I want to give praise right now. And, Stanton is somebody who absolutely deserves it because for as much as an athlete as a whole, specifically talking about his mobility and such, he has been so diminished because of injuries throughout his career. But the guy still knows how to hit, and that's for sure. Records 3 hits last night, including a double to bring in Juan Soto and a solo shot home run in the 8th inning that went on to be the game winner. So, again, Stanton's somebody who has faced a handful of criticism throughout his years. He shows up in the big moments for the Yankees, and that's what's important. And he is helping to, to some degree, put this Yankees offense on his back. Juan Soto, of course, is continuing to do what he does, just get on base. His, attack as a whole, obviously, is very impactful for them. But really, it is him and it's Stanton, because this has been a very low-scoring series up to this point, which is, I'm not totally shocked by it necessarily. I do think that the Royals have the upper hand in terms of pitching. I have some real concerns with the Yankees pitching as well, but that being said, Royals offense, A, not exactly killing it right now, and B, the Yankees bullpen has been excellent for them. The way that they've actually been able to turn this Clay Holmes situation into a positive after a very tumultuous season. Of course, selected to the All-Star team, even though I think that at least I myself and a number of other baseball fans said that Holmes was not playing at that All-Star level. Too many blown saves, really, to be in that top closer position. And the Yankees seem to be in limbo for a while in terms of what to do with him. Now they've started to utilize him as a middle reliever for them, and it's paying dividends because Clay Holmes, he's always had that talent, but obviously when these things start to spiral from a mental perspective, it can get really dicey, especially when you're talking about a pitcher. And instead, again, they've just sort of morphed his role into being a high leverage middle reliever. And 3 appearances, he has 4 innings pitched, just 3 hits allowed, 1 walk, and 0 earned runs. That's, all you could really ask for. You have Weaver on the back end that's really stepping up for them. Now, in this game in particular, there were chances to be had for the Royals. Specifically, it was that bottom of the 8th inning where following the the Stanton go-ahead home run, the Royals, with the top of the lineup coming up, felt like they had to take advantage. Finally, felt like a weight sort of lifted off of the chest maybe of Bobby Witt Jr. He hits a single. He ultimately is advanced to third base thanks to Salvador Perez. And at that point, though, I've been saying this all year with the Royals, maybe fair or unfair. It really just feels like it's the big three of Bobby Witt Jr., Vinny Pasquantino, and Salvador Perez. You get some key moments from other players as well. Massey's been pretty good for them out of the leadoff spot. You get Garcia as well, who, 4 hits the other day. That it's not like there aren't contributors. My confidence level, though, just drops off so dramatically once Perez is off the plate, where, and again, fair or unfair, let me know in the comments section, but, when you have 2 out of those big 3 that are struggling at this moment, Bobby Witt Jr., who, again, had an opportunity, got on base a couple times in this situation, including in the biggest one that he possibly could have had in that 8th inning. It's hard for me to bury him, but he hasn't been great up to this point in the series. And Pasquantino, very clearly, still dealing with injuries. I mean, I thought that maybe we were going to see a rounding of a corner in the wild card series where we did get to see him. Specifically, it was in game 2 where he logged a couple hits for himself, and I believe one of them even a double at that as well. Could be wrong, but Pasquantino just hasn't really had the same impact that he did in the wild card series, and I just think it's a top-heavy offense, to be honest, and they have sort of looked like that up to this point, even without some of their top performers coming through for them. Been a lot on the pitching, but that being said, there should be a little bit room for optimism, considering the fact that specifically it's Bobby Witt Jr. You have to hope that hit that he logged in the 8th inning can at least be some momentum to build off of moving forward here, because the Royals now, backs against the wall, they play tonight against the Yankees, and it's do or die time for them. So I want to look at the pitching matchup as for who is currently going for them. Michael Wacha versus Garrett Cole. I do think it's manageable for them. Wacha has had pretty decent success, all things considered, against the likes of Aaron Judge in particular, where I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, but Wacha has been a very solid, a really solid pitcher for them all season long, and has pretty good numbers against Judge. Don't want to, again, get on Judge too harshly here, but he's still really yet to have an impact either. So as much as, I just mentioned the angle of Royals feel like if they get more out of their top stars, then maybe they can produce more. The same can be said really specifically looking at their number 1 star in Aaron Judge, who really is yet to do much other than an infield single that he had in game 2. So should be really interesting to follow along there. Like I mentioned, that game is at 8:08 tonight. The other game, the Detroit Tigers with, this crazy, I think they are a very infectious, fun team, and it is absolutely, untraditional. I'm trying to think of what the right word for them would be, considering the fact that they're basically just rolling into this playoffs with only one real starting pitcher, and then from there just throwing a hodgepodge of different relievers on the mound and just sort of, pressing the right buttons to be able to some degree, outmanage the Guardians. I don't know if that's totally fair to say, but you look at the situation where the Guardians have opted to just sort of set their lineup based off of who's starting the game for the Tigers, and that gives them the opportunity to play the matchups throughout the game. I feel like the Guardians need to sort of come to an understanding that you can't go, I think yesterday, if I'm not mistaken here, it was Montero starting for the Tigers in this game, or opening, I should say, more specifically. the Guardians went very lefty heavy in the starting lineup, and it just sort of sets yourself up for a situation where the Tigers, where they really do feel like they have a number of different relievers that can come in, give them, some real energy. Where you have yesterday, it was Brant Herter pitching a few innings for you. Bo Brisky, who of course was the hero in that series against the Astros, closing the game there, and game 1 specifically, I believe it was. And Bo gives you a very solid 2 innings in yesterday's game as well, in the middle of the game. So I think that the Tigers have just been able to sort of provide a variety of different looks from a pitching perspective. That is it the prettiest traditional baseball? Definitely not. But, they've been able to shut down what is already a massively struggling Guardians offense. I think yesterday on the broadcast they showed that the Guardians have gone 20 consecutive scoreless postseason innings, which is the longest streak in MLB postseason history. So that is obviously a brutal mark for them. I mean, you have guys that are somewhat producing. I mean, Stephen Kwan yesterday, 3 hits and 4 at-bats. Like that, out of your leadoff guy, that should be enough to at least get 1 run in, and just has not been the case. You have as well maybe some, defensive miscues to some degree as well for the Guardians relative to the Tigers, who have been playing very clean on each side of the ball for the most part. So ultimately, this is a situation where it's Guardians now on the road in Detroit, hosting their first playoff series, or for their first games in 10 years, and that's going to be a charged up atmosphere as well. That game taking place at 6:08 tonight. Even if the Guards get through that, they're going to have to face Tarek Skubal in Game 5. So the Guardians, really have an uphill battle in front of them. I think I said the same thing about the Dodgers yesterday, and here they are forcing a Game 5. So, we'll see. It's baseball. Anything can happen. But, definitely credit to the Tigers for this very fun run that they've been on throughout the second half of the season altogether, when they really came into their own. But we are going to we'll come back with updates, of course, tomorrow afternoon. But as for now, we are going to be shifting gears back to the NFL, where we're going to be previewing tonight's Thursday night football game between the San Francisco 49ers and their division rival Seattle Seahawks. So we're going to be diving into the keys to that game and ultimately giving some predictions. But before we do so, we do have to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are now going to be previewing tonight's NFL matchup between the San Francisco 49ers and the Seattle Seahawks. Divisional matchup here, both teams coming off of pretty disappointing losses. It was the 49ers collapsing late against the Arizona Cardinals. It was the Seahawks in what was a very ugly game, in my opinion, losing to the New York Giants. That both of these teams really looking for a win here. Just a quick note here on the season series. This is a situation where the matchup series, I suppose, where the 49ers have beaten the Seahawks 5 straight times when they've faced off against one another. So, familiar foes, the 49ers have had the upper hand as of their recent matchups. But, Seahawks primetime at home, that's going to be an atmosphere that is hard to overcome. Now, we'll come back around to ultimate predictions at the end, but as things currently stand, the 49ers are 3.5-point favorites. The over-under line is at 48.5, which is up a little bit from where it opened at, and a lot of that is probably because of the fact that you are looking at two defenses missing some key players. On the Seahawks side of things here, their defense has been ravaged with injuries a little bit for weeks now, specifically in that front seven. Now, we'll see specifically a couple key defensive ends for them. Boye Mafe and Derek Hall it's optimistic that they're going to play, according to Ian Rappaport. We do know that they're going to be without Byron Murphy and Reek Woolen. Still TBD on Julian Love. So a number of injuries on the defensive side of the ball for the Seahawks. As for the 49ers, they're down Talanoa Hufanga, their safety, who went out with a wrist injury last week. So that's something to keep an eye on. I think that ultimately here, I guess one last note on the injury front is that the 49ers are going to be without Jake Moody for a little bit of time here. Matthew Wright is a kicker that they at least now have on the roster. We talked about this earlier this week. I think the 49ers win that game against the Cardinals if Moody doesn't get hurt, based off of the inability and to kick down the stretch of that game. They would have had an extra field goal sort of to their tally there. Brock Purdy interception on the last drive, I understand, but your game plan is a little bit different when you're talking about that final drive, knowing that you're not going to be able to kick a field goal. So, we'll see. Don't play the hypotheticals too much. But in terms of, the game itself, I think that the most interesting part of this game is going to be sort of these rushing offenses and seeing who can, get things going for them, because it was one of Mike Macdonald, the Seahawks head coach, of course, his top priorities coming into this week was that he knows the Seahawks need to start to run the ball more. Last week against the Giants, Kenneth Walker, who was a monster 2 weeks ago, had just 5 carries, and it is definitely on the offensive line as well that there's still not a lot of confidence in that group of the front five, but Kenneth Walker is debatably your best, weapon on offense. I understand Seahawks are pretty loaded across the board with some good weapons, so I'm not going to die on that hill that Kenneth Walker is the best, but he's somebody that you have to get more integrated into the game. And I think that is just an objective fact. And it's not that they weren't using him out of the backfield in the passing game, some as well. But it's going to be very hard to just continue to fully rely on Geno Smith, who's having a great season, of course. He's leading the NFL in passing yards. And really, after an ugly start to the season against the Broncos, he's been playing very well. Even in the second half of that game, he sort of took his game up to another level as well. And this is a team that is very much capable, but it just seems like they can't get everything to click at the same time right now, where again, the running game hasn't really been coming together for them. That defense has been dealing with so many injuries that's supposed to be a little bit of the backbone of what a Mike Macdonald coached team is. And, they've been able to lean on their offense, but when you talk about the Seahawks, one of the biggest concerns for them in recent history has been that they have been such a poor team at stopping the run, and they've struggled with that once again over the course of the past couple weeks. And again, I'll reiterate, it's because of a lot of those injuries up front for them that the Seahawks are having to sort of play these games a little bit off script of what Macdonald, I'm sure, would love to do himself. Injury excuses only go so far. You got to go out and you got to play the games, and they need to find a way to stop the 49ers from running the ball, who Jordan Mason has been excellent for them this season. Saw an interesting stat on ESPN about how the 49ers are actually dead last in the league in run block win rate. I can double check that stat as well, but kind of a surprising one because, again, the Niners have done a pretty fine job moving the ball, I feel like, in the ground game. But is that something to sort of monitor further here? I guess we'll have to see. But I do think that the 49ers offense, I understand there's been a lot of injuries on their front as well. Like I just mentioned, you got to be able to overcome the injuries. I think they've done a mostly good job of doing so. Jawan Jennings taking on a much bigger role for them early on in the season, where, without a Deebo Samuel or without a George Kittle, they are able to, handle their own. On that note, I will add that George Kittle is expected to play in this game, was on the injury report earlier in this week. Same with Fred Warner. So, some good news on the 49ers injury front as well coming into this game. But I think for the Niners as well, I don't know what it is with them, truthfully, as to why they haven't been having quite as much success this year. I feel like we're seeing more from Brock Purdy in terms of an individual creation standpoint here, that should be enough, but maybe it says something about the fact that he has had to do so much for him, and you're looking at these games that 49ers have just been unable to close, specifically against the Rams a few weeks ago and against the Cardinals earlier this past week. And that does feel like it's more so on the front of that running game. I do think that they are missing Christian McCaffrey in terms of the flexibility that you have. Again, Mason has done a good job of stepping in and, fulfilling that role. But you look at, he isn't necessarily Christian McCaffrey, doesn't have that same level of explosiveness. When you talk about, explosive plays here for Jordan Mason, again, he's been, very impressive. Doesn't have a lot of those game-breaking runs that you see from the likes of a Christian McCaffrey. And, for whatever it's worth, not that I'm putting him in the same conversation as CMC, but, Kenneth Walker has a little bit more of that explosion to him. And I think that both of these teams are going to need to be able to establish the run in this game, especially for the Niners, who I think that they can get out to a lead out of the gates, but, I do have concerns with the way that this team has been finishing games as of late. You look at, it's a secondary that can be thrown on. I think ultimately you get some pretty good production from your front seven, and that can be enough to, provide pressure on opposing teams. But even still with that, it's not like Nick Bosa's numbers have been eye-popping up to this point in the season. You lose a Javon Hargrave early on in the year. You know that you don't have Hufanga now on that back line. This is a 49ers defense that can be a little bit vulnerable. So, with that being said, I do think that the 49ers win this game tonight against the Seahawks. I feel like just ultimately they are the better team top to bottom. I think that even if they haven't quite gotten the same level of production from their defense and from their run game, they are still very solid on both sides of the ball. And it's not that the Seahawks aren't. They have a lot of talent as well. So, on that note, I do think the Seahawks cover plus 3.5. Now, I understand not a crazy spread there necessarily in terms of, hedging a money line versus a spread bet, but, I myself am not betting on this game right now, or at least I haven't decided on it yet. I'm not advising any bets in particular. I do think that the 49ers win this game, but I think the Seahawks keep it close. I feel like, there is potential for a little backdoor cover-ish. You see when the Seahawks do have to let it rip and, air out the ball, they've been able to stay in games that way. Now, it's just a matter of, can they establish the run earlier on to be able to dictate the pace a little bit more? We will have to see there. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section as to what this matchup holds. I think that we could definitely see some points in this game as well. So, if I had to pick, I would probably err on the side of over 48.5 as opposed to under, even though it is kind of a high line. If you are a fantasy football owner of any of these weapons, really, I think that this is a game that you could probably see points. That being said, you got a couple hard-nosed franchises, division rivals facing off against one another. We'll have to see. But Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section. We are going to be headed into our final break, and when we come back on the other side, we are going to be diving into the top 10 teams in the NFL entering week 6, a little bit of a de facto power rankings. So we will be back with that. But first, we are going to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day, where we are going to be running through my top 10 teams in the NFL entering week 6. So we're just going to dive right into it here. At number 10, I do have the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles have been disappointing, of course, up to this point in the year, just a 2-2 record. And for the record, I do not have the Buccaneers in here, so I understand that's upsetting for some, maybe, that, the Buccaneers did just beat the Eagles. But I do feel like now, coming off of the bye week, the Eagles have a chance to just settle down. This is a very good roster. And now they should hopefully at least be erring towards the side of getting some key players back from them. Sounds like Devontae Smith is on track for him to be available in this game. We will still see about A.J. Brown and what his status is. I'm trying to actually double check here on the fly, but either way, this is an Eagles team that has a lot of talent, and I just don't think that they have quite sort of leaned into what their identity is, which is you have to establish the ground game more. I have no idea why Saquon was going a quarter and a half of that Buccaneers game with just 2 carries. That is nowhere near enough for them. And ultimately, I think that now coming into this upcoming week, they should have at least a little bit more of an understanding on who they are as a team. We'll see. But again, I think they are going to be healthier, and I do feel like they are going to be able to sort of get back on track with a game this upcoming week, where I believe they face the Cleveland Browns, where if there's ever a team to have a get-right game against and, to look like a little bit less of a mess, it is the Browns at this point in the year. So I have the Eagles at number 10. Number 9, I have the Buffalo Bills. Been a little bit of, I wouldn't quite say a free fall for them, but the past 2 weeks have definitely been humbling for the Bills. And I do think that this is a little bit more realistic as to, where they are. Hands were sort of being forced early in the year for a lot of people of, is Sean McDermott actually just a really good coach and he's able to overcome all of these losses and Josh Allen is good enough? Well, while some of that might be the case, and the Bills very much are still in the driver's seat for winning the AFC East and being able to host a playoff game, there's definitely real limitations with that roster as a whole. I more so look at the offensive side of the ball. I just mentioned Sean McDermott's name, the way that he has been able to coach that defense to a higher level considering all of the injuries and losses from the offseason. They have played well enough to be a better team than this. I know that the Ravens ran all over them and the Texans weren't necessarily a unit on the other end without each of their top 2 running backs that were going to be able to expose that. So, there are definitely glaring issues, but the Bills overall, I mean, they have one of the top quarterbacks in the NFL. Yes, I know he was very bad in that Texans game, but I do think that the Bills are still a top 10 team in the NFL in my eyes. Again, sitting here, they are leading their division right now in a division that, isn't great necessarily at this current moment, but the Bills have the potential to get things right this upcoming week against the Jets, and I think I would probably favor them, but not making that pick right now on a Thursday afternoon. Number 8, I have the Washington Commanders. This is a team that sort of jumps into the top 10, and there's a case to be made for them to be higher on this list. I mean, the turnaround that we've seen from them in the past few weeks really has been very impressive. And yes, of course, it's about the way that Jaden Daniels has been commanding this offense for them. But on the other end, their defense, too, has looked very solid these past couple weeks. And, you're seeing some of these off-season additions that maybe aren't necessarily household names, but you have Bobby Wagner, who's producing for you, Frankie Louvu. That front 7 is really good. I mean, seen some moments as well from Dorrance Armstrong, and that's what Dan Quinn sort of came here to do from day one is, a lot of the times when franchises are knowing that they're going to be drafting a quarterback in the first round, you just go get an offensive-minded guy. Dan Quinn's more of a culture setter, and he does that on the defense, in the line of scrimmage, and that's what they're doing right now with that front 7. I do still have concerns with their defense as a whole. I think that they are going to be very much improved from where we saw them at last year. I think there's a very good chance they could have a rude awakening for themselves this upcoming weekend against the Ravens, but have to give the Commanders credit. And I still feel like, barring a blowout loss, I have a hard time imagining that I'm going to be dropping the Commanders outside of my top 10 heading into next week. Number 7, I have the Houston Texans. Was struggling a good amount between this team and the team that is ahead of them, that we're going to be diving into momentarily here. The Texans, as things stand right now, I do think that they are struggling from the fact that they have a non-existent run game at this current moment, at least, and it's something that I feel like eventually, once they get Joe Mixon back, which it's very possible that they do this week, have a little bit more of a rushing attack that, the Texans can really start to ramp up into who they can be, which is a dark horse Super Bowl contender, which is probably even still where they are at as things currently stand for them. But yet to win a game convincingly up to this point. All 4 wins come in one-score games, and winning one-score games is important, but it's not extremely sustainable. The Texans are going to need to sort of take that next step. They went on a walk-off this past week against the Bills, who were playing just about their worst possible football, and it came down to, a walk-off field goal. Would have liked to see a little bit more from the Texans. Not that that's not still a big win, but that's why when I look at sort of their overall resume and stack it up to the likes of a San Francisco 49ers, I know that the 49ers can do it. And maybe it's a little bit of confirmation bias here, and it's because the 49ers, I'm viewing them too much from outside of just what they've produced this season, but I do think if the 49ers and Texans were to face off tomorrow, that the 49ers would win that game. And ultimately, everything I just sort of talked about earlier in the show in terms of this preview, I mean, I think that they are at least on upset alert for the Seahawks tonight. Now, I'm not predicting that myself right now. I do think the 49ers win. I think the Seahawks definitely keep it close. And we could be looking at a situation where when we come back tomorrow, I'm going to have egg on my face by having the 49ers this high. But I think that now, again, I don't want to keep playing the hypothetical game. I think if they have a kicker last week, they can close out that Cardinals team. Now they do have a kicker. Do we know if he's any good? No. Not really, at least based off of the little bit of research I did on Matthew Wright. not somebody who necessarily instills a ton of confidence for me. But either way, I mean, he is at least a viable option at this time. And it's still a very good roster, top to bottom. They're getting healthier, at least from an offensive standpoint. Down a couple key players on defense, that is important to note. But I think the 49ers are just very good. I think we're seeing more from Brock Purdy. I know there are some interceptions in there, but I really like what I've seen from him. And now that they are starting to get all of their pieces back, the 49ers can really start, putting their foot to the gas here. So I have them coming in at number 6. Number 5, I have the Green Bay Packers. Biggest riser from last week. Had them at 9. And this is sort of what I was anticipating from the Packers. I kind of just had to see it play out on the field a little bit more with Jordan Love now back from injury. And that's what we got in this game, where I thought that we saw it a little bit in the second half of that game against the Vikings last week. This is a very good Green Bay Packers team, and I think it's on both sides of the field, honestly. And, there's maybe still some unproven defensively, but, you have Xavier McKinney now with 5 interceptions in 5 games. I do like their linebacking core as well. They got Jair Alexander back from injury last week. This is a Packers team that I think is a legitimate Super Bowl contender and one of the top teams moving forward here in the NFC. I have them coming in at number 5. Now that, again, I don't want to blow by the fact that Jordan Love, him being back, really is the key to this Packers team taking that next step. Number 4, I have the Baltimore Ravens. Was sort of up. It feels a little bit wrong to have the Ravens this low. They are very, very good. Pull out a win against the Bengals this past week. There's a case to be made that it's not all that huge of a win, or at least there are red flags in there, which is their secondary, which is very fair. I talked about their secondary, a few weeks ago as well, when Gardner Minshew, who just got benched this past week, carved up the Ravens in the second half. Not that I'm going to hold a week 2 game against this Ravens team forever, but I think the teams ahead of them have just sort of earned those higher rankings as things currently stand. But the Ravens are very much a Super Bowl contender in my eyes. They are one of the only teams that's really looked consistent on a week-to-week basis. Again, a loss to the Raiders, that stinks, but 3/4 of that game, they were the better team. It's just that they fell apart at the end, and that's an important thing because, we talked about this a little bit earlier in the show as well. 49ers haven't necessarily been able to close games yet. The Ravens, there was that Cowboys game in there as well where they almost let things slip away from them. But they know who they are from an identity standpoint. It's a run-first team. We did see sort of the little bit more evenly broke up role of Derrick Henry versus Justice Hill. In large part has to do with the passing game. Are they trailing? All of those things. Lamar Jackson, I understand it's a game against a bad Bengals defense, but he throws their way back into a game. They win. I have the Ravens at number 4. 3 is the lowest I could go for the Minnesota Vikings, who are one of the 2 undefeated teams remaining in the NFL. And I do still have... It's not concerns or doubts necessarily, because again, they are very much playing far above expectations as of this point, and I want to give them all the credit. That being said, the past couple of weeks have looked a little bit shaky. Sam Darnold hasn't looked excellent. He's playing at a Pro Bowl level for sure, and I think that this is the level of play we're going to get from Darnold at some point. For the most part, I do wonder if at some point though, that's sort of the cracks in his armor in terms of having some bad turnovers along the way and not necessarily being able to, throw a shootout necessarily on the other end when they're facing off against one of the, top offenses in the league. Then we'll sort of see how sustainable it is. The defense is excellent. The offense across the board is very loaded. So I have the Vikings at 3 and a golden opportunity to jump up to number 2 next week as they are going to face the Detroit Lions at home. The Lions are who I have at number 2 right now. I'm not going to totally ding the Vikings if they lose to the Lions coming off of a bye week necessarily, but definitely an opportunity for the Vikings to show who they really are, and for the Lions to sort of settle down the excitement and the hype train surrounding these other NFC North teams. And, you know, the Lions are far from the top dog in the division, outstanding, you know, going on a couple years. Last year was their first division title in, you know, a couple decades, I'm pretty sure it was. So the Lions do have the high ground right now. It's not like they have this history of being the top team in the division, but, you know, they were on a bye last week. People are sort of cooling on them a little bit. I think this is where the Lions come out and they are able to do some real damage. And I think that, you know, you talk about the weapons on the Vikings side of the offensive side, the Vikings offense, which is totally fair. The Lions are just as loaded, where you have Amon-Ra St. Brown as one of the top wide receivers in the NFL. I mean, I think there's a lot of similarities to some degree as well. When you talk about the idea of Amon-Ra and Justin Jefferson, two of the top receivers in the league, some speedster, up-and-coming young receivers, Jamison Williams for the Lions, Jordan Addison for the Vikings. I think the difference is in the ground game, though, right now for the Lions, where they are a group that can dominate, and we know that. And it's multiple guys for them. It's David Montgomery and it's Jahmyr Gibbs, as opposed to the Vikings, where, again, I'm going to keep harping on it. Aaron Jones has been a huge revelation for that Vikings team. We see the run game go down the drain a little bit in the past game and a half or so, where Aaron Jones has been out, and that's where I think the Lions have the clear advantage defensively. Both of these defenses, I do think, can be thrown on in terms of the secondary. I have the Lions just edging out the Vikings, but again, an incredible matchup this upcoming week between these two teams. And then number one, should be no surprise, it's the Kansas City Chiefs. You can keep arguing that it's about the refs. I'm not saying the Chiefs are this untouchable team, but they just, having Patrick Mahomes is just a different level of game itself. And, you know, they lose Rashee Rice, they lose Isaiah Pacheco, they just keep moving. It doesn't matter what weapons are or aren't there, they get results. And I'm the last person, I feel like, generally to be, you know, like, blowing too much smoke up the Chiefs to, you know, talking about how excellent they are, but I think you're just kind of denying the facts as well if you're going to say that this is all on the refs and such. That's just kind of not how the NFL works. Refs can't dictate games. I understand the Chiefs got some clutch calls from the refs at the end of some of these games, but they just dominated the Saints pretty much start to finish this past week, and they did so without their number one wide receiver, without their top running back. The Chiefs are the team to beat right now, and I'm going to be on that hill until I see something drastic that sways me in another direction. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section, as that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you may be keeping up with us. And we will be back tomorrow afternoon, as always, 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern. We will see you then. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't